A single change in the level of interest rates in an economy can completely change that economy overnight. In this video, we're going to be looking at the power of monetary policies. Hi friends, welcome to Econverse. I'm Abrar and I'm a fellow student who topped in my GCSE Economics exam last year in Oman. On this channel, we make learning economics simpler, clearer, and hopefully a lot more fun. In this video, let's look at monetary policies. Let's get straight into it. So we are going to be looking at monetary policies. So when we speak about monetary policies, it's important to understand that monetary policies are essentially very quick and impactful policies that are implemented by the central bank. These policies are again aimed at the aggregate demand of the country, because the aggregate demand is one of the single most important determinants of economic growth. So when we look at monetary policy, it essentially uses three main tools to operate. Firstly, you have your money supply. Secondly, you have interest rates. And last but not the least, you have exchange rates. These are the three ways through which monetary policies operate. So when you look at money supply, it is essentially the total amount of money in an economy at any point of time. The interest rates is the rate of returns on your investments, and the rate that you have to essentially pay extra additionally to the amount that you have borrowed. And exchange rates are essentially the rate at which one country's currency is exchanged for another. So now let's analyze each of these policies one by one. So let's start off with money supply. So by impacting money supply, what they do is they mainly affect one's purchasing power. So one's PP, let's just call it purchasing power, so your ability to buy goods and services. So directly, if you're impacting the level of money supply in an economy, it is going to have an impact on the aggregate demand. So one of the best ways through which money supply is actually affected is through something called quantitative easing, which is when the government essentially sells bonds to the public in order to get some money. Now, how this works is, let's just draw a diagram. So essentially, let's say you have the government and you have households. So essentially, the government sells something you call bonds. These are basically government assets to the public or to the households, for which the households pay back money to the government. So they pay the money in order to buy the bonds, and over a point of time, let's say after 50 years, the government buys bonds back. So by buying the bonds back, in order to buy them, the bond is basically returned to the government, and the bond is bought back by the government, for which now the households get money. So now this money is basically a direct influx straight into the aggregate demand, which leads to higher consumption, higher investment, higher spend, basically higher aggregate demand. So these are, for example, this is one of the main ways through which the government affects money supply, and this is called quantitative easing. Now we've looked at money supply and how this works. So basically, money supply leads to increased purchasing power, which leads to increased aggregate demand, which leads to economic growth. So now let's move on to the second main one. Now this one's really important. In this one, we're going to be looking at interest rates. So interest rates essentially go on to affect consumption and investment. So when you look at interest rates, how do they affect consumption and investment? So let's first look at investment. So let's say you're someone who wants to invest your money. Essentially, the more the interest, the more you'd want to invest. Now, IN is invest and I is interest. And let's say the lower the interest, the lower you'd want to invest, because suddenly now you're making lower returns. And when we look at now consumption, let's just look at consumption now. I'll just write it in white so that it's easier. Okay. With consumption or borrowing in this case, higher the interest rates, you want to borrow lower. On the other hand, lower the interest rates, you want to borrow more, because this is essentially the amount of money that you're paying back. So essentially, it is inverse with consumption and it is positively related with investment, and this goes on to significantly affect the economy's aggregate demand, because it affects the amount of money that the people can invest and consume. Now we've looked at that. Lastly, if we were to look shortly on exchange rates, for which I would have another video, let's just try and understand what exchange rates are. Exchange rates are basically the rate at which a country's currency can be exchanged for another country. So this affects, basically policies related to this affect net exports, which is the exports minus the imports. We will surely look at this in detail in a future video. So basically, by affecting the exchange rate of your country, you're essentially affecting the level that is being exported and imported, which directly has an impact on aggregate demand. Again, monetary policies can also be broken down into two main aspects. Monetary policy can be expansionary and can be contractionary. Expansionary is when it looks to increase aggregate demand, and contractionary is when it looks to do the opposite of it. Now, that is all for monetary policies. If you think this video helped you understand economics better, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to join the Econverse. I'll see you again in the next video where we look at supply side policies.